Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. Be aware, this is your first and only warning. Many spoilers lie ahead. Right now, we're taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on February 6th, 2024, and all of them originally published January 9th, 2024, with the exception of the first title I'm going to talk about, which was released through the DC Universe Infinite Early Access tier, or whatever the heck that is. I think you can get it on both the Ultra tier and the Standard tier, but I'm not sure. Anyway, first one was kind of like a Valentine's special, DC's How to Lose a Guy Gardner in 10 Days, #1, an 80-page giant, and as the cover would suggest, it has a pretty light and even kind of silly tone to it, but what the cover doesn't suggest is that it's actually a lot of kind of shorter stories about different characters, and I'm not really into whimsical types of stories, and so there wasn't really much for me here. It would be, I suppose, neat if they really dived into a more serious approach to romance and relationships, but they even say in the promo materials they're modeling this after rom-coms of the 90s and 2000s, and so, okay, if they're going for that flavor, that's legit for people who like that flavor, but it's usually not mine, so this one wasn't really for me. Then we had Action Comics number 1061. Now, this really had my attention. They were giving promos about this in other comics leading up to this, little previews, and I was really ready for them to get away from the kind of collection of short stories format that they'd been using previously, and kind of this broad focus on the quote-unquote super family, and I was just really not into what was going on there, and I speculated that maybe others wouldn't be for the long term as well, and so I was just waiting for something like this to kind of like reset the status quo of what kinds of stories are being told in Action Comics. So very on board for this. However, it's part one of a story arc featuring Bizarro, and I I have a hard time with Bizarro. You just heard my thoughts on not really liking whimsical comics, and that's the reason. Bizarro is almost always written to be this kind of silly character. He talks in a sort of like cartoony caveman type way, and then also you have to parse through his negative speech, which is I think always kind of inconsistent. I'm like, okay, is this, and it depends on the writer too, and so kind of like trying to decipher, okay, what is the translation of this? Which parts of this sentence are obviously, opposites that I need to then turn around in my head? But if you do that consistently, other parts, depending on the writer, won't work. And so because there's not a really strict formula on how Bizarro's dialogue is written, it is always a chore for me to figure out, okay, how is this writer approaching the negative speech of Bizarro, and how do I figure out, what Bizarro is intending to say? And even sometimes here, I was like, I wonder, is this writer's even being a little bit inconsistent? Now, part of that is because at one point in the story, Bizarro gains the ability to speak in a way that Superman will be able to understand. It's still caveman speak, but it's at least not negative. But still, there's enough inconsistency throughout. It's not as bad as like when Zatanna is casting spells, and I feel like, okay, what is that word backwards? I just recently kind of gave up on that. I'm like, okay, she's just saying gibberish and magic happens. I don't need to know exactly what she's saying, But Bizarro, I feel a little bit more like I have to know, and so it just slows down my experience of the story enough that makes it just cumbersome enough. I'm not really into it, on top of it being silly. However, this story looks like it's potentially going to hit the reset button on Bizarro as a character. Because of some multiversal events going on, he has lost his home world, meaning he has lost his Bizarro wife Lois, he's lost his Bizarro son Boy-Zarro, and so he is a man, or a Bizarro, that has just experienced incredible loss, and it looks like he's looking to take it out on Superman. Part of his method for doing that is to go to Gem World, which is, I think it was Gem World, or Skartaris, I can't remember which one, but like one of these magical places in the DC universe with lots of magic people and magic things going on, and he basically acquires the ability to use and leverage a whole bunch of magic, which they kind of suggest is very reasonable because Bizarro is like the opposite of Superman. Of course, again, it's not handled with consistency, otherwise he would be Kryptonite Man, right? But no, they at least tap into the idea that, okay, well, Superman is weak to magic, Bizarro is like fed by magic. He can leverage and use magic. He is a supreme sorcerer just waiting to happen all these years, and that seems to be what's going on here. And he uses magic that at the end of the story seems to kind of self-destruct Bizarro, but then also starts turning everyone in Metropolis, at least, into Bizarro people. And I'm kind of like, oh no, you know? And yet I could tell that they're going for some seriousness with the character. It's just a route of seriousness that I'm not sure how I feel. I prefer those rare instances where writers will treat Bizarro as a creepy Frankenstein who doesn't even talk. And he's like Frankenstein's monster, you know, who will inadvertently or just in a rage or when he's just, you know, really feeling defensive, will end up accidentally killing people and stuff. And so he's frightening even as he is a character we can have sympathy for, but he is still dangerous and he does kill, he does do damage. I tend to just like serious stories, and so that iteration of Bizarro, rare as it is in DC Comics, is my preferred version. This whole route of potentially reinventing him as a magical character, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. If at the end of the day it will kind of feel silly, I don't know. I need to give it some time. Even though we see him kind of dissolve at the end of this issue, I think clearly he's going to be coming back. But what will that form take? What will be the new version of Bizarro going forward? Or will this story arc eventually just revert to the same old Bizarro that we've not known and not loved? Is that how I would say? Well, I don't know. If I was Bizarro, I'd say that I have hated and I don't know. Forget it. It's too confusing. Too much effort. Moving on. Green Lantern #7, written by Jeremy Adams with a backup story by Peter Tomasi exploring Sinestro's son. This is thankfully the last issue that will feature the backup story with Sinestro's son. I've just not really been into that, largely because of the artwork, but also I'm just kind of ready for like, okay, let's develop Sinestro's son and then let's get him out into the wild. I'm kind of like, I don't need this much origin story, and the art style is not really, I'm not really feeling it. So I'm just ready to get him into the mix of things and interacting with Sinestro in particular. We'll see. But anyway, this story follows up on the kind of pseudo cliffhanger of last issue where we find out that Hal Jordan has not been talking to Kilowog in his off hours, figuring out life as a Green Lantern that's kind of bound now to Earth because of the nature of his new ring. He's been kind of confiding and relaxing and talking to Kilowog at the end of each day. Well, that Kilowog was just kind of a construct of his mind and I think of his ring as well. And he confides in someone at the end of that issue that Kilowog is actually dead. And so issue 7 gives us a flashback to the events leading up to Kilowog's death. The way that Kilowog dies, I don't think he's dead for good. They've killed him at least once in the past, maybe twice, and I just don't think it's going to stick. Kilowog is just too much. I think he's a fan favorite among Green Lantern fans, and I think he is too meaningful and useful as a story device in Hal Jordan's stories, and so I think he's going to be coming back. But anyway, going back and doing some catch-up was helpful for me, and one of the little narration boxes as they were kind of doing a little bit of catch-up in the expositional dialogue said, as portrayed in Green Lantern Invictus. And I'm like, okay, I need to go back and read that, because evidently that explains the dissolution of the Corps and the United Planets kind of taking over for the Guardians and stuff. And I had just not been connecting with the Green Lantern run prior to this new one and was waiting for a new creative team, you know. But for some reason, I guess I didn't read issue 1 through 4. I'm all mixed up now. I thought Adams took over with the new #1, but maybe he didn't. Anyway, I've got some catching up to do to know what in the world is going on with the new status quo. But they dip into that a little bit. I felt a little bit lost already, but they're at least catching me up on the stuff that I was supposed to feel lost about because it hasn't been, told yet, namely the death of Kilowog. So, but we're still kind of in the middle of it. I wish that this story actually would have started just with this flashback material and just gone chronologically instead of this handling it via flashback. I think that would have helped onboard me a little bit better. But all that said, I'm still interested in what Jeremy Adams is doing. I'm pleased that even though he definitely has the ability to write brighter and optimistic stories, family-oriented stories that work really well in the pages of The Flash, that he can also turn and do a story that feels very different and is more serious in the pages of Green Lantern. Yeah, I'm enjoying Jeremy Adams' run on this so far. This just kind of didn't feel like this big monumental issue, and it's not overall the most gripping Green Lantern stories that I've read, but I'm finding it solid. What I think I'm giving up on is Outsiders as of issue number 3. We have this new status quo presented with issue number 1 of this series that says that the Outsiders now, this new iteration of them, is about exploring the weird corners of the DC universe. And I really liked that premise to start with because I thought it was going to involve maybe tapping into previously mentioned but barely explored aspects of DC continuity. Excuse me. And I thought that there would be things happening in this story that would really unearth elements of DC continuity that hadn't been played with in a while and would do some stuff with it that really matters in the DC universe. But what seems to be the case so far, especially in issue 3, is it's more like a classic Star Trek formula where it's like we're just going out and we're exploring, and each issue is new weirdness that we're going to run into. We're going to confront the weirdness, deal with the weirdness, and then move on to a totally different weirdness next issue. And none of it is really going to have a major impact on the DC universe. This issue, they were going into some kind of like warped narrative dimensional reality, a little bit like what was going on recently in the pages of The Flash. But just it's all a bunch of parallel universe Batmans that they're interacting with, and it feels a little bit silly. And on top of it all, at the end of it, I'm just like, none of this matters. It's just weird playing around with crazy psychedelic ideas. But it's barely moving the characters forward. It is doing some stuff that's kind of developing Kate Kane as Batwoman and her maybe motivations a little bit, but just hints of it right now. But you know, it's not leaning into the kind of characters as much as I wanted to, and it's certainly not leaning into tapping into the obscure corners of the DC universe. It's creating, I think, new obscure corners, and then just kind of like touching on them and leaving. And I'm like, that's not really what is going to pull me in. So I think I can say, as of Outsiders number 3, that I'm done with this series. Finally, continuing to enjoy Wesley Dodds' The Sandman, which is a period story, takes place in the 40s, where he's up against a villain that is kind of like an antithesis to him, wears a similar kind of costume, and has gotten a hold of his journal, his experimental journals of like sleeping gas, and is taking the formulas that he used that were lethal, that just kind of were developed on the way to discovering his sleeping gas. He was never going to use the lethal gas, so he was like, okay, well, if I do this, it's lethal. We set aside that formula. Well, there's a bunch of those formulas that basically this villain is getting his hands on, and the story, I mean, there's a lot of action and kind of fighting, and not a ton that's advancing the plot, except for in a major way, which reveals that, okay, it looks like maybe the Department of Defense, the U.S. military, is ultimately behind wanting to get their hands on these journal entries, because the general that Wesley talked to in issue number 1 just rejected his idea for providing this gas as a non-lethal way of doing warfare. He's like, no, not interested, you know. But it looks like maybe that general has engineered this new villain to go and get Wesley Dodds' stuff and then bring it back to the U.S. military so they can use it in their warfare. And so I appreciate kind of like the broadening of the stakes and getting kind of bigger there. But I think that this issue, it didn't move things forward quite as much as I wanted to. So it's one of those series that like I'm enjoying right now, but one issue at a time, it's not really as engaging as I'd like. I think it's going to read better for me once the whole story arc is done and I can sit down and read it all front to back. I think that experience will be a much more enjoyable and engaging one for me, because before I know it, I'm flipping pages and like, oh, it's over. I didn't feel like we got as far as I thought we would. One thing I did like, though, was their exploration of empathy at the very beginning of this issue. At the start of the issue, Wesley Dodds has been exposed to his own sleep gas. And so, as he says in his narration, now I've fallen victim to the sleep gas of my own invention. For the first time, I feel what the Sandman makes criminals feel. And I don't know if what they present here has always been the concept of the sleep gas, but either way, I found it really interesting. Basically, the sleep gas takes him into his memories of all these times in his life where he has wronged other people. And he revisits those moments not just as memories, but as he calls them, empathies, where he feels what those who he hurt felt in those moments. Now, can the gas actually do that? I mean, I think that it's really just triggering his own ability to empathize. He can't, of course, know exactly what these people were feeling, but it's triggering something in him that is causing him to go through the process that I think Jesus wants us as believers to go through when he says, love others as you love yourself. That perspective, that idea of loving others is meant to take us into the exercise of trying to empathize with others and imagine how maybe they feel, how we would want to be loved and cared about and considered, and then apply that to other people. And so certainly empathy is a very important component of love as taught by Jesus and in the epistles. And Wesley's observation as he's having this experience is that, in a lifetime, there are just too many of these situations that I don't remember. And he would just do anything to make it stop. It's really just overwhelming. And I think that's really valuable for us to spend some time considering that, the degree to which we hurt people without thinking, without realizing it, would really be overwhelming if we had a full understanding of it. That's really a humbling exercise for us to think through and consider. So I like that, while not in a heavy-handed way, Wesley Dodds' The Sandman as a series is continuing to kind of touch on, I think, some valuable moral and philosophical issues. Nevertheless, this week, I read 5 comics, and only Wesley Dodds was really something that I was engaging with, and even then, it was kind of over too quick before I really was feeling excited about it. And so I am wearing the black ring today, which is reserved for weeks where I just kind of feel a little bit dead and meh about the comics that I read. I can't help but wonder if the black ring will be the most common ring for me to read. And that's not because I dislike comics. It's because with DC Universe Infinite, I have access to trying so many more comics than I would if I was buying them individually. I think back in the day when I was paying for comics individually, I would really only spend my money on the ones that I was very, very likely to enjoy. And so generally, I was reading fewer comics, but also enjoying more of them in terms of their percentage. And so hopefully I won't come across as too negative, but just for the sake of kind of covering DC Comics each week, I am going to end up reading stuff that, I don't know, 50-50 may not be for me. So, but anyway, yeah, this week gets the black ring. Which of these books has your attention? I would love to get your thoughts and reactions to any of these books this week. You can leave those in the comments below if you're watching the video version. But those are all of my thoughts for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.